as I told you, Vouvray and Montlouis are really close. You only have the Loire between them. So we are technically 200 meters away from the area.
And for you, what is the biggest difference between Vouvray and Montlouis?
The terroir.
But in terms of the style of the wines?
In the Vouvray wines, it's when they say dry, it's most part of the dry have a little bit of sugar. But in Montlouis, when you say you have a dry wine, it's really dry, so you can't really feel the sugar in the wine. So for me, there is a big difference between them.
And do you want to tell a little bit about Les Argiles?
Yes. Maybe I can show the map.
Yeah.
Then it can be easier. So, I don't think. Okay. So here is our vineyard in Vouvray. You can see down the map the Loire. And when we go up, you can see the city of Vouvray here. And all our vineyards in green. So we have 8 hectares in Vouvray for now. And Les Argiles is particular because we blend different plots which are on the top of the hill in Vouvray. Because the city of Vouvray is in a valley and all the vineyards is on the slopes, and Les Argiles is on the top of the slopes of the hills. So it's a blend of different plots we have. It's a clay with limestone soil, which is the most part of Vouvray terroir, which is quite deep clay, and you have some rocks, limestones on the top, and it's quite deep soils. It's really different than when you're in the slopes. If you have any question about the explanation I give, just please tell me, because maybe it's hard.
When is a good time to be drinking these wines?
For the 17 we will taste. It's a kind of wine which can be earlier to open in the wines we produce. So I can say we can open in the 5 years, but you still can wait for a while, because the way we make the wine, it's to keep the wine for 20, 30 years. So after, it depends on your taste.
And there's one question from Kim. She says, Les Argiles is such a beautifully concentrated wine. Do you think that is due to the soil, or is it the winemaking?
I think it can be probably because of the soils, because the winemaking is the same for all the different wines we produce, because we really want to show the difference between the different kind of soils we have. So it's more about, I think, the side quite deep of the soils, yes.
And in terms of winemaking, actually, as we're touching that, how do you approach your winemaking?
We are not the kind of winemakers who love to move a lot the wines. So we press the grapes, the Chenin, and then we put the juice in barrels for almost a year. And then we just let the nature start. So we have the alcoholic fermentation with the white yeast. And we just keep a look in the wines. We taste quite, and maybe it's at the beginning of vinification, it's like 3-4 times a week, and for now it's more about two in one taste in 2 weeks. So
Sorry.
Keeping the wine and let the nature making what it have to do.
And when you say, is it 100% barrel fermentation and aging, or is it partial?
Yes, it's a barrel, but it's a typical barrel we use because it's quite big. It's 600 liters. It's very typical from the Loire Valley because it's bigger to avoid the wood side in the wines. And also we doesn't like to use too much new oak. So it's like 10% of new oak for each wine we produce. And then we have like until 10 years, 15 years barrels.
Brilliant. Alice, there's another question from Alice who works with us. Did your father, François, and his father come from winemaking families? And what was the reason, where did his calling come from? Because he was a lot of people considered them pioneers for their generation. What inspired them to start a domain?
Yeah, my grandparents were winemakers, but when my dad started to make wine, my grandparents were still making wine too. And my father really wanted to work differently than my grandparents. So that's why he separated the estates and he created his estates with Francois Chidaine, which is called Francois Chidaine for now. And since 2008, he took all the older vineyards from my grandparents because they stopped to make wines because they are old for now.
Did his parents agree with the way that he wanted to do the vineyards?
It was quite hard at the beginning because, you know, in France at the beginning of the 90s, most winemakers were working with chemicals, and my dad really wanted to change that because for him it was impossible to express the terroir in the way we worked. So it was quite hard at the beginning, but then no, they were really happy.
And what was his inspiration to go biodynamic?
I think it's more about the fact that biodynamic is first about the environment, but not only for that. It's more about the cosmos. So it's a way to have the vines to grow, because for us the wine is first made in the vineyard and not in the cellar. So the fact that we are really working in the vineyard, we are looking for all the vines maybe 2-3 times a week to see how it's growing, if we have disease, and if the grapes look great. So it's really important to us to use this technique because you can help with some infusions, some decoctions, help the vineyard. It's like homeopathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Homeopathy. Yeah.
So it's a way to have the vines to have the best expression of the grapes.
Wonderful. We have Lawrence would like to ask a question. So I think Tom is going to try and unmute him. Lawrence, are you there? You may have to unmute yourself. That doesn't seem
I'm
to
drinking
work.
something totally different. So I just finished my 05s and I'm drinking an 07 Clos Baudouin. And I know that you took that vineyard up. Has it been replanted yet? And are you making wine there again now?
Clos Baudouin is, when we took Clos Baudouin, it was a really old vineyard, yes. And we decided to start to replant, but we didn't replant all the plot in a single time. So for now, half the plot is old as before, and half the rest of the block is five. It's gonna be the sixth vintage this year.
Yeah, because there was some disease. I think there was some disease or something in the vineyard, wasn't there? I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
because it was old. We had a disease called Louie in French. I'm sorry, I don't know the word in English. It's kind of I'm sorry, I already have the word.
No problem. No problem.
Sorry, go on.
But the wine is so fresh still, and it's 13 years old. I mean, it's incredible.
And I'd say it's a soil not really deep. So you have the limestone like 20 centimeters far from the top. So it's really interesting to keep the balance with this kind of soils.
That's great. Thank you.
Alice, we have two questions about Argiles before we move to the second wine. One is from Paul. How old are the vines in Argiles? What's the vine age between the different plots?
It's hard to say because it's a blend of different plots. So I think the older is about 80 years, and which is 80 years, and the youngest is about 12, 13 years.
And also Steve has asked, although dry, is there still some residual sugar left in the 2017?
No. We, in Vouvray, as in Montlouis, we are not really working, as I said, about the Vouvray area. We really like when we say dry, it's a real dry wine. So we have really low level of sugar, really, really low. So it's really
and I wonder if this is a good time to start opening maybe the second bottles. And do you want to say a little bit about Bournais and the comparison between the two vineyards?
Yes. So Bournais is in Montlouis first, and it's really different than the Vouvray appellation. And also it's quite similar about the kind of soils because it's a clay with limestone soils too. It's a single plot, and it's really close to the Loire. It's in the just close to a cliff. So it's the plot, the most close to the Loire we can have in Montlouis. And also it's not really deep. It's quite 30 centimeters to be on the rock. So it's really interesting about the expressions of the terroir and the grapes. Maybe I can show you on the map. So you can see in Montlouis, the Loire on the top. Here is the village where we have the estates, which is called Usseau. And on the extreme east of our vineyard, which is here, you can see Les Bournais. So it's the closest plot from the Loire we have. And it's also very different than the other plots. So Bournais will be more round in Montlouis than the other wines we produce because it's really different.
And how old are the vines in Bournais?
We planted Bournais in 3 times because it's the first time we plant vines in this part, in this terroir. because most people told us it was a bad idea, but you can see in your glass that they were wrong. And Bournais was planted first in 1998, another time in 2002, and another time in 2010.
And what in Bournais, what do you look for? What is for you the hallmark of, if this was blind and you recognized it, why would you recognize it as Bournois?
In the when we taste,
Yeah.
It's a really special plot. First, because it's a really nice place. We love to work, and also because it's more round. It gives wines more round in the mouth, and in the very beautiful vintage as 2008 and 2009. It gives a really beautiful expression of the truffle, white truffle. So it's really typical from the plot.
It's absolutely gorgeous, and I probably opened the wines about an hour ago, and it's now, as Kim was saying, it's now starting to open up. It's really wonderful. Steve was commenting on the brilliant back label on your wines, which give a really good key about what is dry and what is sweet.
Yes.
Which is fantastic. Talking about your labels, what is the inspiration behind the labels? Because they're quite distinctive, especially if you compare the Bournais and the two other ones.
We decided to have a different label for Les Bournais and Clos since 14, because for us, Les Bournais and Clos are two plots really different than the others. Like for us, they are the best terroir we have. Not that the others are bad. They are just different because there can be really hard in the youngness to understand, but at the same time, when you taste it 6 months after or a year after, it's gonna be really different. They are so hard to understand, and at the same time, they can be really wonderful in the tasting. So yeah, we really wanted to make a difference with those wines. And you can see on the label, maybe I can show you. We have a sun and the moon. It's about the biodynamic. Because we are not the winemakers who love to say that we are in biodynamic and organic, because it's more for us a way to make the best grapes more than selling the wines. And the way we use the sun and the moon about the biodynamic and organic way help us to just give to the people who want to taste our wine the philosophy.
And I really like the labels. Could you tell us a little bit about 2017 as a vintage? And also, I think 15 was your first vintage. Maybe compare the 17 to the other vintages you've made.
17 is a really great vintage. Quite hard too, because unfortunately we had frost. In the second year we had frost in 16 and 17. So we didn't really have enough grapes and to be happy for this vintage.
How much did you lose?
Sorry?
How much did you lose in 17 and 16?
In 16, 90%, which is gorgeous. And in 17, sorry, 80%.
Wow.
So after we decided to work in a different way to protect the vines from the frost. But in 17, we didn't really have the chance to keep the grapes. So it was very interesting in the harvest because we didn't really have many grapes. So the concentration with the level of sugar was quite fast. So we did not really have to use a sorting table. We almost picked all the grapes in one time, because when we used to have a harvest before to pick the grapes, we use the sorting table and we can come in the vines to pick in 2, 3, 4 times. It really depends of the maturity. But in 17, it's almost everything in a single time.
And does it?
Sorry.
So no, go on. Go on.
I don't understand.
I was going to say the 17th from the two that I've tasted so far, there's a real energy to the wines, which I guess is part of that vintage.
Yeah.
There's a few questions coming in. Gideon is asking, what do you like to eat with these wines? So what would you match the food with?
For les argiles, I think you can eat some fish, but how to say? Maybe Kim can help me.
Kim, Tom, could you unmute Kim for a moment? Yeah.
C'est quoi en français?
Alors, j'ai pas pensé à reprendre ça. Les fruits de mer.
Ah, shellfish.
Shellfish?
Shellfish, yeah.
Okay.
Shellfish.
And yes, and les poissons à chair maigre en fait.
Okay, so, vas-y.
Il y a les poissons les gras comme le thon, le saumon, et les poissons plutôt à chair maigre comme la lotte par exemple, c'est plutôt maigre comme
le bar ou la dorade.
Oui, voilà.
Right. So more lighter fish such as sea bass or sea bream, or not the kind of the oily fish like salmon or tuna, but the lighter style of fish.
But for Bournais, it's different because it's a kind of one more round, more fat. And so it's better with salmon, for example, or fish which can be with more fat, maybe. Yeah. And the last one is really different because it's a semi-sweet. So it's more about salt and sugar. Good with Chinese food, for example, Japanese food, but you can also have the Guinea fowl. My mom, for example, cook Guinea fowl with peach, fresh peach.
Wow.
It's absolutely wonderful with this kind of wine.
We may have to ask the recipe for our blog.
Yeah.
Autumn comes. Steve has asked a question going back to the difficult vintages of 2016 and 2017.
Yes.
Do you ever buy in grapes when the vintages are as difficult as that and you have very small yield? Would you ever buy grapes in from other producers, or do you only use your own grapes?
The only one time we buy grapes is to make our sparkling in Montlouis, and it's only the grapes coming from the area. In 16, 17, and 18, we decided to buy grapes of Chenin Blanc, which were not coming from the Loire Valley, but from the south of France, because we didn't really have enough grapes to be able to continue to make wines. So we took the decision to create a new wine, which is called the Chenin from somewhere else. So yeah, it was the only one way we found to be able to continue to be winemakers.
Makes sense. And was 2018 and 2019, were they better vintages for you?
18 and 19 were great. 18 was really sunny. It's the first time we picked the grapes with 35 degrees outside. It was quite weird for us. But it's a great vintage. I think it will be a vintage easier to drink, to taste, because It's more round, and at the same time, I don't think it's gonna be a vintage we will keep for 30 years as the others, because you can see that it's more sunny vintage. So I don't think we're gonna be able to keep it as 17. And 19 is amazing because we had grapes and beautiful weather and very nice balance, and it's looked like an amazing vintage, which is gonna be really easy, and at the same time you're gonna be able to keep it for a while because you have a really beautiful acidity with the sugar. So yeah.
How is 20 shaping up?
Sorry?
How is 2020 starting to look?
For now, the grapes were blowing in 2 weeks ago. So we will see, but we don't have any disease. We have some rain today, so we will see. But for now, I think it's going to be great.
A little bit earlier, Kim asked a question about what is the different? Has there been a change in style during your father's career and now with you taking over? And have you been influenced at all by your international experience? You've obviously worked with two of the great names in the Loire Valley, Dagueneau, Clos Rougeard, as well as with Chris Alheit in South Africa. How has that influenced you as a winemaker?
I grew up with those kind of wines. For example, you say as Dagueneau and Clos Rougeard. So for me, they're kind of reference. I grew up too with my dad experimenting different ways to work the wines and work the wines. So I really love the way he works because it's the best way for me. I think for me, you have to.
I don't know if anyone else has.
Be respectful of the vines and of the wine. So I don't think I'm gonna change many things, but we always can do better. So maybe I will change things, but for now, I'm not. I'm taking over, but I have time to be alone, and I'm still working with my dad, and we're working together and making decisions together. So maybe later, but for now, I think I prefer to just learn more about the different plots and the different vines we have to be better and to be able later to make the great decisions.
And why did you go to South Africa?
Because I really wanted to know more about Chenin Blanc, which is the grapes we produce more in Montlouis and Vouvray. And at the same time, I really wanted to go overseas. So I decided to go in South Africa because they are the first Chenin Blanc producer in the world. And they have a really different climate and way to make the wines. So it was really interesting for me to make this experience, to understand the Chenin Blanc more, because it's a grapes which can grow with 40 degrees, with a clay which can be 3-4 meters deep and very fat clay, and it's just dry. So it was really interesting to see that, and keeping the freshness of the Chenin.
This is maybe a good time to open the last bottle or start pouring the last one. Would you like to introduce Clos Habert?
So Clos Habert is still in Montlouis. It's a single plot, and at the same time, it's one of the first plots my dad started to work with. It's a very beautiful plot and also a really old plot. Most part of the plot have more than 90 years, so we try to keep it more and more every year, but we know that at some point we're going to have to delete and to replant. So I'm going to just show you where it is. So the Loire and Habert is here. And Habert is really different than Bournais and Les Argiles because it's in a clay with flint soils. Because in fact, in Montlouis, we have most part of the plot with flint, clay with flint. So it's really typical. And Habert have a really beautiful exposure in north south, which permit us to have the best concentrations to make the semi-sweet. So at the same time, we can have a level of sugar quite small and just keep the freshness with the acidity, with the balance in the maturity of the grapes.
And how much residual sugar do you have on this?
We have 12 grams. 12.
Beautifully integrated. Now I find with when you have Chenin that ages, I find they feel drier when they get older.
In the semi-sweet, yes, but you have to wait more than 10 years because the sugar will be integrated with the balancing of the wine, with the acidity. So yeah, in fact, you can feel less sugar than it was young, than when it was young.
And sorry, I slightly missed how old the vines are. How old in Clos Habert?
Half the plots have more than 90 years.
It's amazing. There's an amazing concentration here. Someone asked earlier if you would have this with soft goat's cheeses.
Sorry?
Someone asked earlier if you would ever have this with soft goat cheeses.
Yes, it's great. It's a great idea. Yeah.
Because I just think it's absolutely fantastic. What do you think we get often asked, is global warming a problem in an area? And I guess as a white wine producer especially, you probably see the effects much more strongly. How does global warming affect you?
Not we, because I was too young, but for my dad, the first vintage he's seen the climate change was in 1997, because he had a really hot summer and a very big concentration in the grapes, and he makes some sweet wines, but it was so sweet that it wasn't like water. It was more like some ham. No, not ham. La confiture.
Kim?
Jam.
Sorry. Because it was too strong of sugar. It was a really high level, and for him it's the first year with the climate change. And yeah, we have for now different things which are changing. The frost in the spring more and more, and the winter here is not cold as before. 20-30 years before, we had snow for 2 weeks to a month, and for now, if we have snow only one day, it's just magic. So yeah, we can see already different things changing in the climate, which are giving it some impact to the vines. But at the same time, the Chenin Blanc is, for me, one of the only one grapes which can just be a solution because it's a grapes which with a natural acidity and high acidity, and when it's you can just pick the grapes at the best time, the great time, with the best maturity. You can just have great wines, and whatever, if you have 35 degrees as we had in 2018, you can still make wines with the low level of alcohol with a well balance. So I think for me it's one of the solutions.
And sorry, just I was going to ask you. You talk about frost being an issue in recent years. Did your grandfather have that at all?
Yeah, they had. At the same time, they had different experiences than us. They had snow in June.
Wow.
So it's quite different. But yeah, they had frost, but not as much as we have.
But there's another question about aging potential, especially for the sweeter wines. When would you open them at home, and what is the aging potential?
For the 17, I think you can wait 20, 30 years easily. We keep every vintage, every different wines. We keep some bottles of each of them, and we love to taste them several years ago to see how it's going, and also at the same time to just check if we can maybe change something in the way we mix the grapes. And the semi-sweet can really be being wait for 20, 30 years. But yeah, you will definitely not have the same sugar at the beginning.
They're stunning. If there was one other grape variety you could work with, is there another grape that you would like to work with?
We work with Sauvignon, but it's not my favorite. It's another one in red, which is called Pinot de Nice. It's very typical, but it's a grape variety which is hard to work, and that's why most part of the winemakers stop to work with. It's a nice grapes which can be close to the Pinot Noir, and you can have the spicy you can have in the Pinot Noir in this grapes. So yeah, it can be for me another one interesting to work with.
So you may be making some red wine at some point.
Maybe one time.
Alice from our team has asked, do you think being biodynamic helps or hinders you with the effects of climate change?
It can help. It can be a solution, but it can help. Definitely.
And in what way can it help?
Because we always try to understand the vineyards before to do something, to do a treatment, to prune, to do anything on it. So because we are always looking for the vineyard, we always try to take the best decisions and not the worst. So for me, it's something which can help.
There is another question from Elizabeth. Would you serve the Clos Habert as an aperitif or more towards the end of a meal?
If you want to drink it in aperitif, I think you can. There is nothing wrong with that. at the end of the meal, it can be great with some dessert maybe. After, I don't think it's wrong. No, it's great.
I think it's lovely. I mean, I would happily serve this at sort of early afternoon out in the sort of late afternoon in the garden. It's perfect. I like those days because there's so much acidity that the sweetness is not overpowering to me. It supports the wine. Steve is asking quite an in-depth winemaking question. How about a regime in the cellar and the use of sulfur? Is it added in several dozens? Have you experimented? Sorry, have you?
Yes, we tried in 2008, and I was with my dad for this experience. We tried to do Les Bournais with sulfur, just a little bit, and Les Bournais without sulfur. Since this experience, we decided to put sulfur, just enough to keep the wines. Because if you want to keep it for 20, 30 years, if you doesn't add sulfur, it can work. But at the same time, for us, the experience without the sulfur was not great. So we decided to add just a little bit of sulfur at the moments the most intelligent we can find. For example, at the end of the alcoholic fermentation, just to protect the wines for the aging, because we are in Paris and we can have oxidation. And before the bottling, just before to bottle the wine, just to make sure it just can be kept for several years. But yeah, we are not the winemakers who doesn't add sulfur.
What would be have you been allowed by your father to make a change? And if you could make one change, what would you make? What change would you make?
For now, it's hard to say because my dad made a very big work about the estate, and he really tried to give us to my brother and I, because I'm working also with my brother, to give us the best estate we can have, and with the less things we have to change. So I don't really know. It will be more about the precisions of the grapes, of the maturity, or it will be little things. It will not be only one thing. It's gonna be maybe several things, but just some little things which just can help to have better grapes and maybe better wine.
Such as? Can you give an example?
Not really.
Have you, who has been, aside from your father, been the biggest influence in your winemaking? You know, who has really been inspirational for you in terms of your winemaking?
I think for my dad, it was Didier Dagueneau, for sure.
Because
when my dad started to make wine, he is really someone with a very big open mind. So he really tried to exchange every time with the other winemakers. And when he was younger, he met Didier Dagueneau, and together they were traveling, meeting other winemakers. And I think he was someone who really helped my dad to improve his techniques. And it was something which was shared.
And actually, one final question from me about your barrels. It's a rather technical question. Where do you source the barrels from? Where do you get your barrels from? What type of wood and which cooper?
It's old barrels coming from only the center of France, because we worked for 10 years this year. For 10 years now with someone who makes barrels, and it's a small company, and they do really beautiful things with the wood. And for us, for now, it's the best tonnelier, and they are called Atelier Centre France, and they are also in Loire Valley. So it's really interesting to work with them and to improve the aging in the barrels with them.
And what does the barrel aging give to your wines? How does it affect the wine? Sorry, go on, Kim.
Qu'est-ce que ça apporte de faire le vieillissement en poudre au vin pour toi? Qu'est-ce que ça apporte au vin?
It's more about the fact that the wine is something which is living, and if we could just make the wine in stainless steel tanks, for example, but the micro-oxidation we can give to the wine, and the just little bit of wood, new oak we use, just can give some structure to keep the wine. And we definitely know that today, when we want to make some wines to keep several years, it's better to use wood and oak, French oak.
They're absolutely wonderful. Alice, I just thank you so much. If there's any other questions, people have got 2 seconds to ask them. But Alice, thank you so much for an amazing tasting. I thought the wines were absolutely shining. For me, there's a real textural element to the wines. And having seen them open up over the last 2 hours, I'm just really excited about having some in the cellar for in 5 or 10 or 20 years. I did a Hewitt tasting back to 21, and this is the first time it reminds me of the old style Hewitts, but in a different way, but it's that textural thing. There's one more question quickly in. What red would you recommend in the Loire Valley?
For other winemaker?
Yeah.
I found 4 or 5 years ago some winemakers who make gamay in the center of France and in the beginning of the Loire. They are called Domaine Serol. They make really amazing red wines, and I don't really love the Viognier, but they work the Viognier in a very beautiful way. Their wine, which is called De Buton Blanc, is wonderful.
I think that's a very good answer. Alice,
how do you spell it? Ça s'écrit comment, le domaine que tu as recommandé?
Vous voulez que je l'écrive?
Oui, si tu peux, oui.
Je vais l'écrire. I'm gonna write. Yeah.
Merci.
Thank you.
Yes, so thank you very, very, very much for the tasting. I know it was a lot of hard work on your side to organize it, and this was your first Zoom tasting, and I think you did a brilliant job. The wines were shining. Thank you very much. I hope you'll do one again for us in the future. And yes, thank you very, very much, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the wines as much as I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alice.
Thank you.
I hope you can
Another
see the
wine,
chat.
Dylan.